Yeah,
But
yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about, and we've referenced this like 10 times now, but now we're actually going to talk about it, the distinction between subjective and objective, because I've noticed a tendency in your writing, in particular in your latest essay on proportion and silhouette, that you always kind of like hedge. You're hedging. Well, this is my subjective point of view, And so I want to talk a little bit about the distinction between subjective and objective. And I think that you've kind of like teed up a little bit of the position I was going to try to take. I don't know if it will be correct, but it seems like in the way that you are dressing, you're saying this is merely subjective. It's just my kind of point of view, if I understand you correctly. But it seems like the way that you dress is actually speaking to something objective. Like, for example, when you're talking about how high your trousers rise in relationship to the buttons on the jacket, what that seems to me to be speaking to is a certain desire for symmetry in the outfit, which is to say that that is tethered to an objective reality because it concerns the actual structure of the jacket and the trousers. I don't know if I'm making sense here, but could we talk a little bit about the distinction between subjective and objective?
Yeah. I would say that to answer your first point about like, hedging a little bit, I think this is something I want to address like future stuff as well. But there's this idea about like how complexity kind of equals authoritarianism for some reason for a lot of people. And I always want to make it clear, like, even though I'm writing a lot about it, like, it's okay. Like, you're okay if you don't want to do it. But there's also what you said, like there is a little bit of objectivity there, which I like to.
Can we pause there for 1 second? I'm a little
Sure.
bit confused by that statement. The complexity means authoritarianism, because I would think it would be the opposite. It would be non-chaotic.
Sure. I would say, I guess what I'm trying to say with that statement is, when things are like so nitty gritty, it feels restrictive. And that's what I attribute to like authoritarian, where it's like the fact that I have, as my girlfriend would put it, I'm always writing to a straw man that I'm arguing with, and I'm trying to come up with as many defenses as possible, which is probably why the articles are so long. But I feel like, in some feedback, it sounds like I'm trying to be authoritative, like, okay, like I'm trying to, like, any question you'll have, I have my answer for it, and I'll shoot you down, kind of a thing. And I don't want that to be the case. And it's supposed to be kind of like music, where it's supposed to be, it's, even though everything is notated out, it's supposed to be freeing, this freeing feeling. And I feel like that ties in a little bit with the objectivity and subjectivity kind of a thing. I will say there is a little bit of objectivity in there, but it's something that I hold to myself as objective, as you said. And so that kind of like, I don't know, oxymoron, paradoxy kind of mentality there, where I'm very aware of how it comes off. To me, it means I can't be objective because it's so subjective. It's like a weird thing that I have. And so I actually feel like that dichotomy is played out as a spectrum. And I've been wanting to, as I said before we started, I'm kind of writing an essay on this topic, and I'm still wrapping my head about how I want to express this idea. But I always think of it as things can be objective, but you can be subjective in how you apply them. And so even though there is symmetry involved in how I view my own outfits, which is it's a very accurate statement. I love having the things meet up and everything, but life isn't always like that. I can think of a lot. I mean, there's art movements and architecture movements that are not built on symmetry. And so I can't exactly say that it's the right way to do it. And even if I consider clothing as more fashion than as a tool or something to dress as like a formality kind of a thing, if I'm comparing this to any kind of fashion subgenre or designer, they don't have symmetry either. And so objectivity kind of goes out the door when you try and push it to other people. And so I know it's a really awkward, I'm kind of going all over the place here, and please stop me if there's a specific nugget here, but that's kind of how I feel about the whole thing. And as a creative person, a guy who loves writing music, I still can't officially say that what I do is like the ideal, even if it is what I think, even if I hold the ideal to myself, because I don't believe that my music is the best music. I don't think that what I listen to is the best music either. There's a lot of room for interpretation. But the guiding grace here is that if you like it, then here's why you might like it, and here's how you can keep doing it if you like it. So in that sense, it becomes objective. Like, so if my aesthetic becomes what you want to base your style off of, which I'm very flattered if anyone there says that, the objectivity then comes in, where it's like, you can't really be me without having that high waist, without having that symmetry there. It would, like, if you were me and you were buying a jacket, you wouldn't buy that jacket if the button pockets didn't align together. But if you're not being me, which most people are not Ethan McNally Wong, you don't have to have that objective idea in your head. You can buy whatever jacket you want. You can buy a jacket with lower button stance. You can wear a trouser that's not high waisted. So it's all in that kind of a vein. So that's where that distinction lies for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this really fascinates me. So I'm going to push back a little bit in good spirit, though.
Yeah.
So I want to keep the analogy in the realm of art for a second, because I think that that's where this distinction might be made more clear. So I would, for example, posit that Edward Hopper is a superior painter to Jackson Pollock. These are two painters whose work I greatly, greatly enjoy. I love them both. But if I were to say who objectively has the superior painting skills, I would most definitely reference Edward Hopper. And that, at least in part, is because of his objectivity, if you will. So his paintings have a higher degree of, since we're talking about this, we'll just use the word, a higher degree of symmetry and a lot cleaner presentation, needless to say, cleaner presentation than Jackson Pollock. And so that would be tethered to a kind of reality. And I suppose where I'm going with this in terms of clothing is that I think that when you're talking about having trousers that are risen to a certain, point where it comes to your jacket, you're expressing a kind of symmetry. And I think that that is a more, and I want to use this term kind of loosely here, and we can kind of like tango around it if you want. But I would say that that is closer to a correct form of dressing than otherwise, because you are expressing a kind of harmony or symmetry in your outfits. So this is a very loose position that I'm taking, in part to be a devil's advocate, but I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a great example here. I've had this discussion a lot. Not all the feedback on proportion was a great one. I'll tell you that. The DMs were filled with a lot of people pushing back, and every article does that for some reason. I don't know why. But to that point, I mean, I think you're onto something there. But it kind of comes down to like semantics. And I always feel like I'm being the devil's advocate, because most people, I feel like, have this view where symmetry is good, and that means a well-dressed man or a good outfit. And I feel like it comes down to what we believe to be as good. And of course, we can look at history and everything. Like, if we want to compare Hopper to the breadth of art that happened before him, obviously it would align closely with a lot of classical art, right? Because I mean, that's just what happened there. But if we're talking about, I don't know, who is more creative, I should say, which is a different metric, than being a technically proficient or symmetrical artist, obviously personally, I would give it to Jackson Pollock, right? Like, I think it.
Let me pause you there just for 1 second. I apologize, because I want to make this point before I forget it. But I suppose that is why we consider those pieces to be classical, precisely because they represent a kind of ideal of beauty. And that's why we appreciate them and isolate them as great works, because they do have that level of symmetry and harmony.
Right. I think even there, right? Like, I've always been of this idea that, like, classical to me was always like a period of time rather than I guess I'm making a more of a music connotation here, where classic is not Baroque and it's not romantic. Like, classic refers to a specific period there. It's not that the classical period is better than Baroque or romantic or whatever. It was that period. And so I kind of apply that, maybe mistakenly, to art, in a sense where classic art I guess it can be used both ways, right? So, and I feel like sometimes we get hung up on the past where just because it existed back then doesn't mean that it has to be held up or at least be used as an ideal for future art, because it's kind of a biased metric for, um, it's hard to always compare anything to a classical painting, because I think the other works of art can be judged on their own merit, as their own expression of creativity. And so it's it's kind of odd, because with menswear it's kind of similar but it's not, where obviously classic menswear is there because it's been around, it's relatively unchanged for 100 years, despite barring lapels and proportions changing and everything like that. But even the fact that there is so much variation there kind of pokes holes to me in that ideal sense, because not even Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart had different proportions and they all had different ideas on what they thought was good. And even within the classical realm of art, there's so much variation between master artists there as well. Even with modern art, there's a lot of different masters there. So there's so much variation. And because artistic expression is about those nuances, it's not just, again, repeating Jackson Pollock again. There's so, like, Joseph Albers is still different from any other guy who's making a painting of a cube. There's still a lot of nuance there. So to me, that just points to the fact that everything is so subjective, even if they have their own objective taste. So it's hard to uphold anything in my worldview because of the variation. Like, the variation itself is antithetical to that ideal. And that's why I hedge, and that's why I think that there isn't as an ideal as much, because even when we say a well-dressed man, like, are we referring to the proportions or are we referring to the styling of it? Like, there's so much involved in that loaded semantics term, which I mentioned earlier, that it depends on where you're approaching it. Like, a modern art museum, or if we're talking, okay, if it's an abstract art museum, Hopper shouldn't be there. And on the flip side, if you wanted a representative painting gallery, you wouldn't put Pollock in there. But that's why you have wings in the museum, and that's why you have different museums of different collections. And the fact that you can go to all these different museums, again, points to the idea that there is still subjectivity sprinkled all around this area. And maybe you just have to go to the right museum. You have to be in that different frame of mind, or a POV, to call back to the beginning here, to kind of get what's going on. Not to get it, but to kind of appreciate it for its own merit. And again, the fact that I've hung out with a lot of people who dress all differently than me, within classic menswear or not, kind of adds to that idea of this kind of, you have your own lane. I can't say that one car is better than the other car just because it looks more like a Rolls Royce than it does a Prius, for example. But there's still marvels of engineering in itself. One might be better for the environment because of the technology contained within it. There's always a bunch of different stuff. I might want to drive a car that looks like a Rolls Royce, but there's a lot of so many different decisions in there. So the ideal to me, that word to me means that you should do it no question. But I have so many questions and so many pushbacks that it just doesn't make sense to have an ideal in that way. I think you can get inspired from it, but holding it up as a metric is kind of tough. Not that it's impossible, and not that some people don't have the personality for it, but then that's why it comes down to literally, what do you want from your clothing? So that's, then it becomes subjective. The question becomes subjective again. So does that help a little bit there?
Yeah, I think so. But I think it would be more helpful maybe if we ground it just a little bit. So sure. I want to offer up an example on, we'll try to work with it this way. Hopefully this is still intriguing to those who will be listening to this. I'm personally fascinated because this is something that just kind of always goes on in my mind when I'm thinking about, like, why outfits look as good as they do. When you see somebody wearing a good outfit, I'm always thinking about proportion. Mm-hmm. So for example, I would say that the width of a lapel on a jacket should be larger for a man who has larger shoulders. Because I think that is objectively a better looking jacket because it accentuates the man's features. By contrast, if a man were to, a man with broad shoulders were to wear a jacket with slim lapels, I would say that objectively, that is a less good looking jacket because it does not accentuate his features and it's not proportional to his features. And once again, I just want to belabor the point here. I think that there is an objective grounding for taking that position because once again, it is tethered to the reality of the man's body. Do you see where I'm going with this? So what do you think about this?
That's, I'm not going to say that you're wrong there because I definitely like being proportional, but it's one of those things where I can think of like counter examples, like I think Hitchcock was a very well-dressed man, and he primarily, there's a lot of photos of him in the 60s wearing suits, and maybe you could say that the 40 suit would be better on him, but I still think he looks good in the 60s wearing, a 3-button, slimmer lapel jacket, and he's not.
But see, that is the position I would take. I would say he would look better in a jacket that had broader lapels. He still is well-dressed, but he would look better. And the reason I'm able to make that claim that he would look better is because I'm picking up on something that has objective grounding.
Right. I think, I don't know, like there's always, I'm not sure. Most people know that I'm not a big fan of hypotheticals because I feel like it goes in every direction. And it's so hard. Maybe it's my personality. I'm never really grounded, but there's so many better alternatives all the time, and it's hard to think in that way because in that sense, I think there's too much optimization. It's kind of like being like, I don't know, like using an algorithm on your life kind of in a sense. And I guess if you want to look your proportional best, I think that if that's what you want, then you should do it. I would say, again, on me, I think I do look better wearing a wider lapel jacket. I'm not a very skinny guy. I have a more round face, and I think the wider lapels help with that, proportionally with that round feature. But I don't know. I'm inclined to agree with you that people can look better with the proportions that are more harmonious to them. But I think that intent plays.
Here goes the hedging.
Yeah, I would say intent plays because I think it's maybe, and I apologize if this is kind of not as interesting to people, but I feel like proportions make sense objectively when you don't care about them. Like, for example, if you are dressing to look better, whatever that means, and I guess here if we're talking about proportional harmony and symmetry, if that's the goal here, then there are steps you can take there. But I think that once you get into something, a lot of subjectivity comes into play. Like there's a lot, even I'm reading this book right now about it's called Absolutely on Music, which has conversations with Murakami, a writer, and Seiji Ozawa, a conductor. And they talk about this, how, again, it's like comparing Beethoven and Mahler, where, Beethoven is cleaner or whatever, and Mahler has so much stuff going on. And you could technically say that Beethoven is better because it's cleaner, but I feel that that's a disservice to Mahler and his own genius. And so if a larger man was getting dressed just for the sake of looking good, I feel like, it's fine. He should wear those things if that's what he wants. But if he were to ask if he intended to look after a certain aesthetic, like if he really wanted to look 60s, for example, then he would have to wear a slimmer jacket. And so it's like in that's my point back. It's not really a pushback. It's just more of like an additional point of view where I think people don't always have to look, quote, better. I think people are fine to or should be encouraged to dress in the way that they want to, and then have this internal struggle about objective versus subjectivity, because that's the whole fun of it. It's like making a chord on music. It's like, yeah, that chord, or the way, it's kind of like maybe like how you make the chord with your hand. It's like, it might feel better if you do it one way, but maybe a guy just has a weird fingering style, and so he does it a different way. Like I had that comment to me by my old piano teacher, where I would always make chords in the wrong way, or do a scale in the wrong, like, I was supposed to do like 1, 2, 3, then move the hand over, but I would do it in the wrong way. It would sound the same, but it's like they were kind of focusing on that part of it. And I'm like, well, if that's not the intent there, it's weird. I don't know. It's a subject that still is kind of odd, because clothing, has that line between like looking objectively good, but also feeling subjectively good. So it's like, I feel like the fact that there's that dichotomy means that you can't really define it. Like that by its virtue, you can't just be objective about it. If that makes sense. I mean, yeah, but I would say I prefer wide lapels over anything. So, and that's why I don't wear a lot of 60s clothing anymore. So it's like I have this view clearly, but it's like how I apply it is kind of, it's kind of loose.
Yeah. I think we should perhaps leave that one as is.